Hi, welcome back to Sarah Stitches UK. This is the second episode on my YouTube channel, and we're going to follow the same structure as last time. So I'm going to start off talking about my WIPS and the stitching that I've been doing since we last met. And then in the second part of the video, I'm going to be reviewing a book. And the book for this episode is Sampler's Smallpox and Sugar, Life in Muller's Bristol Orphanage. So the latest book from J.K.Bower and Witney Antiques, talking all about Bristol Samplers. So let's get into it. On the last episode, I showed you my finish of the Quick Quaker Sal by Modern Folk Embroidery, and I'm pleased to say that that is now an FFO. So I framed it. I framed it myself. I put it on a mat board and laced it at the back and then put it into this frame. I'm really pleased with the frame that I chose. I got this frame from a company called Over the Rainbow on Etsy. It's a company based in Essex. So I think it's really good. It's not the first time that I've used this company. They offer a very wide range of sizes of frames and a good selection of different mouldings as well, and they also do custom sizes. And this 8x6 frame I think worked really well for the Quick Quaker Sal finish. This was stitched on 40 count Silver Moon by Zweigart using DMC 310 and Weeks Dye Works Turkish Red. And I'm not sure if I mentioned it last time, but I'm actually starting the Quick Quaker Sal again. Now I plan to really follow the chart again in the month of June, but I have cheated and got a little head start here on my new all red version, which I'm hoping is going to be the start of a little red wall. So I thought Jacob's Quick Quaker Sal and the Fast Frisian Sal that he's going to be doing in August would be an ideal two projects to kick off the beginning of a red wall. So this is a restart or a second start on a Quick Quaker Sal, and this one is stitched in DMC 321, and I'm really pleased of how it's looking in all that lovely bright red. So this again is on 40 count Silver Moon by Zweigart, and that's my progress. So hopefully by the end of June this one will be another finish. The other thing that I've done since I last saw you, and I know a lot of you did this as well, was I attended the Spring Mingle. I attended the lecture that Jacob gave, and I agree with all the positive reviews out there about that. I also went to the meet and greet with Jacob, and this might be a bit controversial, but I thought that the meet and greet was perhaps even better, definitely just as good as the lecture that he gave. So if you missed the meet and greet, I really encourage you to log back onto the platform and check that one out. Also, if you want some sort of insights into what might be going on at future events, I was at the morning coffee session with Steph from Lindy Stitches on the Sunday morning, and she was sort of chatting about possible ideas, and people were putting suggestions into the chat, and there were some fantastic suggestions and ideas of what might be happening at upcoming events, designers that people might like to see, and also people who might be invited to give lectures. So I think that would be another sort of really fun thing that you could check out. As well as those sessions, I also did the class by Nicole Spohr, and I was having an absolutely fabulous time. I was whizzing along, working on my Ladybug needlebook. But as you can see, my progress stalled somewhat, and I thought I'd share the reason because it really stopped me in my tracks and someone else might be interested to know. So this material that I'm using here, the red and the grey for my needle book. This is wool felt, and someone in the class asked, well, is there a difference, or what's the difference between wool felt and felted wool? And apparently there is a difference, which I had not picked up on. And my understanding is that felted wool would be perhaps quite a bit thicker than wool felt. So progress on my ladybug needlebook is stalled. I've ordered a sample of felted wool to see what the difference is. And if it does turn out to be significantly thicker, then I'll be continuing on, restarting using felted wool. So I was having a great time. This was my first time trying wool applique. I thought Nicole did a fantastic job with the teaching, and I just stalled out because of the difference between wool felt and felted wool. So if it's something that you're thinking about, then those two things are different. I'll update you on how different in the next episode. Another project that I showed you in the last episode was Maria Wales Newson by Hands Across the Sea. Maria Wales Newson, 1838, by Hands Across the Sea. Now this is a stitch along, a SAL, hosted by Judy in the Hands Across the Sea Facebook group. I'm sure you've seen a lot of other floss tubers participating in this SAL, and the stitching for the month of May, which is pretty much coming to an end. Today is the last day of May. The stitching for May was the stitching of the house and the grass. A couple of people have said that's about 5,000 stitches, so it was a significant chunk of stitching there. I'm pleased to say that I have just made it over the line, and I'll just start off by showing you the house here, hopefully. Maybe get that up a bit closer so you can see it in a bit more detail. Now it turns out that I'm not a very good reproduction sampler stitcher. I have a terrible tendency to make adaptations and changes. I'm quite happy with that tendency, but I know some people prefer to stick closer to the original, but that very clearly at this point is not me. So let me talk to you a little bit about my adaptations. I mentioned last time that I was turning the lights on. So the lights are on in this house. I also decided that I wanted the roof is charted to be plain, just like the bricks in the house, but I thought that was an awful lot of very plain reddish brown stitching. So I decided to try my hand at adding tiles onto the roof, and I did that just using backstitch. I'm quite pleased with how that turned out. I can hold that up. Hopefully you're seeing that there. So you can see just the backstitch every 3 squares. I did it's blocks of 6, so a tile is a little block of 6 stitches, and I just did that with the backstitch of 3371. Now I had also changed the colour of the house slightly, so I'm stitching this in DMC. This is stitched in DMC on 40 count peridot linen by Fibre on a Whim. And the called for colour for the house was this colour that you see on the edge of the flower here, which I think was DMC 221. And I thought that was really sort of a very reddish purplish colour. So in the house I decided to change the colour, and the bricks then are done in DMC 355, which I thought was a more brownish red. Now I keep going backwards and forwards on whether I think this was the right change to have made, but having done all those stitches, it's staying like that now, I can assure you. And then in the roof I used the same 355, but I also thought I would experiment with perhaps having two-tone tiles in the roof, again to try to get a little bit more variation. Now, I know on FlossTube sometimes people say you can see it in person. The honest truth is you can barely see it in person, so I can well imagine you can't see it at all on camera. But just in case you can, I'm going to hold it really, really close. So that roof is a mix of DMC 355 and 3777. And the way I chose the colour was by looking at the DMC thread card, and I really looked for one of the colours that was very close to DMC 355, and 3777 is right next to it on the colour card, so I knew it wasn't going to be a big contrast. I thought maybe it might be a bit more, but actually I'm very happy. It probably didn't need to be a big contrast. I think the back stitching does the job pretty well. In my last video, I talked about that I think I mentioned that I'd personalised this project a little more, but I don't think I went into detail. So here I completely changed the verse, and so I thought I'd talk a bit now about how I changed the verse and why I changed the verse. So my verse, which isn't a verse, says, "Green ring-necked parakeet, Sitacula crameri, seen in London since the 1800s. I saw them in your garden." So when I saw this sampler, I was really struck by the number of parrot-like birds in the sampler, and particularly I was struck by these two little guys here. I thought they were pretty fabulous. And my brother lives in London, and in parts of London, particularly south of the river, there are green ring-necked parakeets, and they're extraordinarily noticeable because they are so very, very bright. And the cover of this book about the parakeets in London gives you some sense of how very bright green these parakeets are. And so when I was choosing my linen, and when I was choosing the colour for these parakeets, which is DMC 733, I went for a really, really bright green as opposed to the sort of more muted grey green that I think the tabby cat lichen linen is. And I thought that I would personalise this sampler to remember the day when I was with my brother and my mum and dad in my brother's garden, and my brother pointed out for the very first time to me these extraordinarily bright green ring-necked parakeets, and I was just blown away that something so bright and tropical could be found in London. And so I decided to commemorate that event in this sampler. So that's why the verse ends with, "I saw them in your garden." So when I was working on this sampler and I decided to personalise it in this way, I decided that I needed to learn a bit more about these parakeets. My brother knew that they had been in London for a long time but didn't really know the history. So I started off with this book, I found this book, The Parakeeting of London, by Nick Hunt and Tim Mitchell. And it talks about all of the different theories. It interviews a lot of people in London about where they think the parakeets came from. And there are lots of different accounts. And also I went online and I found some old newspaper articles from the Times which talked about parakeets having escaped from a house near where my brother now lives, and the owner was hoping to recover his parakeets and was offering an award. So the stories of these parakeets tend to date from the mid to late 1800s, so probably a little bit after Maria, but certainly there are accounts of people having domestic birds, tropical birds, in their houses from the early 1800s. So I put seen in London since the 1800s. Now, I cannot imagine that Maria, who lived in the north side of London, had any parakeets, but you never know. But I thought that it was still a sort of fun thing to think about, you know, that she was living in London in the 1800s and she had parakeets on her sampler. It's much more likely that these parrots are found on other samplers, we know that. And I remember reading sometime between the last frost tube and now, I don't remember where I read it, I'm sorry, that parrots on samplers are symbols of being talkative, but also symbols of marriage. So it seems much more likely that that is the inspiration behind the parrots on Maria's sampler. But on my sampler, these are green ring-necked parakeets, and they are the green ring-necked parakeets that you would now see in part of London. So hopefully I'm holding that up now so that you can see the whole work in progress. You'll see also that I was utterly terrified of getting the positioning of the house wrong, and so I did, before I got too far into the house, I did bring down the border here on this other side so that I could come across and check that everything would line up there. So I've got a head start there on the June stitching for Maria Wales Newson, 1838, and she really is going to be a pretty big sampler, I think you'll agree. So this is stitched with DMC, a mixture of cold floor, and some changes have been made as well. Okay. As well as stitching on Maria Wales Newson 1838, I've also been stitching on the red primer sampler that she stitched earlier in 1832. So you can see that there. And you can see here, hopefully, that there is some over one stitching in the second and third lines where little Maria obviously ran out of space to fit the words on, so she's done what I think a lot of girls did very practically and creatively and put the remaining words over one just above. I'm stitching this on 56 count tabby cat linen, just the ticket, which is the called for linen. And so when I was thinking about stitching the over one, I thought, I don't really fancy that. But I thought that it would be possible to move the second and third lines further this way, further to the left, in order to fit all of the words on in one line. And I'm happy to say that I was just about right. So I moved this second H to be in line, I moved the second H to be in line with the start of this bottom row of swirls here. I think and you can see it works perfectly well on the second line, but here on the third line, that E of the B is right in line with the last stitch on the right hand side, so it might be better to come even another 1 or 2 stitches over to the left. You'll also see that I was very bold and that I put 2026 as the year in this sampler. I replaced 1832 and I put 2026 in the eyelets, which means that I really do have to make sure that I get this done this year. When I do adaptations of samplers, I do include the girl's name elsewhere. So my plan here, for example, would be to put Maria Wales Newson and 1832 at the bottom of the sampler. So I don't take away the sort of original name, I just maybe move it and add it somewhere else. I did that. I do like to strike that balance between remembering the original stitcher and honouring her work, but also making it mine, because this is now my work. So that is Maria Wales Newson, 1832, on 56 count, Just the Ticket by Tabby Cat. And this was my first time doing the eyelets, and I absolutely loved them. I thought I had a great time doing them, and I used the tutorial that Audrey of Stitch Stitch Bead did on her YouTube channel, and I also looked at the Stitch Bank on the Royal School of Needlework, which has videos and written instructions, and I find that a really wonderful resource as well. So they're two places that you can go if you're also stitching eyelets. So that is all of the stitching. That's the end of the first part of the video. I'm going to pause now and then come back, and we will move on to the book review of Sampler's Smallpox and Sugar. Back in a second. Welcome to part 2 of the video, the part of the video that I like to call Sarah's Stitching Bookshelf. In this part of the episode, I like to review a stitching related book, and this week the book that I'm going to be reviewing is Sampler's Smallpox and Sugar, Life in Muller's Bristol Orphanage by J.K.Bower, published by Witney Antiques just this year. So I had not originally planned to be reviewing this book in this FlossTube episode. I thought I would review another book, which I'll save now for next time. But when I saw the message on the Witney Antiques Instagram page that this book had been published, I thought that I would jump at the chance to review it on the channel. I have been interested in Bristol Samplers for a while, like a lot of stitchers. My husband worked for a while in Bristol, and he's taken me to visit there to show me around the city. And last year I was on a work trip in Bristol, and I was fortunate enough to have some time to be able to go and visit the George Muller Museum there. So I had a little bit of background in Bristol Samplers. I haven't stitched one yet. I certainly hope to do so in the future. But that's sort of why I decided to change my plan and to review this book this week. The book aims to look at the Bristol Samplers, but also to put the Bristol Samplers very thoroughly into the context of the life and work of George Muller and of his wife Mary, and into the broader context of life at the orphanage as well. In terms of the content of the book, it's divided into quite a large number of sections, each of which lasts a couple of pages. So to read a few things from the contents page, it looks at George Muller, it looks at the orphanage that he set up on Wilson Street before moving out to Ashley Down, and Ashley Down is the name that we often see stitched into some of the samplers. It looks at the samplers themselves, it looks at the staff in the orphan houses, it looks at life in the orphanage for the children, and it also looks at sickness and particularly smallpox, as the title of the book suggests. So that's the contents. I think you can really think about perhaps in terms of 3 parts. The first part of the book looks very much at the life of George Muller, who he was, what his background was, and the establishment of that first orphanage in Wilson Street, and then thinking about how he was able to raise the money from wealthy people in the community in Bristol in order to be able to set up another orphanage at Ashley Down. The bit about Mary Muller, I think, is particularly interesting, and the book does talk about how Mary's work and Mary's contributions are often overlooked in the history of the Bristol orphanage, but the book makes a really good argument for the importance that she had, and how her background and how her early life and training as in education and as a teacher is likely to have helped the work of the orphanage, and likely to have helped the work that she did in the orphanage as well. And the book sort of is suggesting that she was perhaps someone who was particularly influential in the area of needlework. And I'd like to just perhaps take a moment to read a section taken from the pages dedicated to Mary Muller. It talks about her education, her contribution to the work at the orphanage, and there's also a page copied from George Muller's autobiography. And in his autobiography, he describes Mary, and this sentence jumped out, and it says, "In addition to the good education of a lady, she possessed what is in our day so rare among ladies, a thorough knowledge of useful needlework of every kind." And when he's talking about useful needlework, he's contrasting it to this idea of what he calls fancy needlework, which he says that she could do fancy needlework, but that she was dedicated to useful needlework. And it's perhaps this type of needlework that we see reflected in the Bristol Orphanage samplers, because of course these samplers were stitched as part of the girls' education with a view to them later in life hopefully being able to go out into domestic service. That's the first part of the book. I'd say the book is roughly 200 pages, and about 60 pages at the beginning are dedicated to the discussion of the establishment of the orphanage, George and Mary Muller, and how that came about. The middle section, which is about another 60 or so pages, is the section dedicated to sampler stitching, and that section, that sort of part of the book, obviously I'm sure you can guess was the highlight for me. And then the final about 60 pages is looking at the life of the orphans, what we know about their experiences there, thinking about how strict life at the orphanage is likely to be, particularly given George Muller's connection to the Plymouth Brethren. It looks at the possibilities of being able to find where some of the orphans might have been buried, and there are some quotations as well from people who lived as orphans in the orphanage, and reflecting on their time there, and some of them are very positive and very grateful for their time there, and some of them talk about it being a very difficult experience. So that's an overview of the three parts of the book. So I'm going to talk now a little bit about some of the highlights for me. I especially enjoyed, I think, the pages about Mary Muller and Mary Muller's contribution. I also enjoyed reading about the way that children came to be accepted into the orphanage. It reminded me of my visit to the orphanage, when if you go into the museum, the George Muller Museum, and on the left-hand side is a room that's set up in the style of a study, and in there they have a selection of envelopes which you can open and look at, and they contain different letters relating to different orphans from their relatives petitioning George Muller to accept these children into the orphanage. And when I went into that room, quite by chance, the envelope that I opened was a letter from a family asking for a little boy to be adopted at the orphanage, and that little boy happened to be from my hometown in England, and the letter was addressed from a street that I recognised, and it talked about the town, and it was really incredibly moving. I did not grow up particularly near Bristol, and what was in the book talks about how some of the children came from the Bristol area, but others did come from further afield. I can just share with you perhaps the 2 postcards that I picked up from my trip to the George Muller Museum, which show photos of the orphans and the orphanage, and there are similar, if not the same photos, I'm not certain, very similar pictures I found in the Sampler's Smallpox and Sugar book. So that's one picture from the George Muller Museum, and then this is another of the children, and with a quotation from someone expressing their gratitude for the opportunities that they were given at the orphanage. I think one of the things that the book does exceptionally well is it tries to present a very balanced view of George Muller and George Muller's aims, and of the experiences that the children had in the orphanage. I think it really thinks about his religious motivations. It thinks about how it's likely that George Muller didn't spend all that much time at the orphanage, for example, and it does think about how the experience there for the orphans was certainly likely to be very, very difficult at times. This was not a life of luxury, and the needlework that they produced was practical in function, and the girls are likely to have had limited freedom in the choices that they made. The main section of the book, the section of the book on samplers, I think was fantastic. It absolutely blew me away because it put forward an argument that I had never heard before. Now, I am by no means an expert in Bristol samplers, and as I mentioned in my last video, I'm relatively new in terms of my returning to stitching. I've been stitching for 2 years. In that time, I've been trying to learn as much as I can about stitching and the history of sampler stitching in particular, but I'm not an expert. So the argument that was being put forward in the book, which was that instead of thinking about samplers as Bristol samplers, as one homogeneous group of samplers, what we ought to do is we ought to think of samplers as being from different houses within the orphanage. So over time, the orphanage at Ashley Down expanded from being one house to eventually being 5 houses. And the book argues that each of these houses had some distinctive traits in the samplers that they produced. And the book provides tons of evidence, loads of absolutely fabulous pictures showing how it's possible to see differences between the samplers that are produced in the different houses, and then also how the samplers produced in each house might change over time. And the way that it's possible to identify which house a sampler was stitched in is by using the identity number of the stitcher. So we are perhaps familiar with samplers such as Mary 395, which is by Hands Across the Sea and is one of the charts in my collection. And this is the chart that I actually bought as my souvenir when I visited the George Muller Museum. And so Mary 395, the 395 is the is thought to be the identity number of Mary in the orphan house. And this book explains that it's possible, using the number 395, to work out which house Mary lived in. And then once you're able to get together several samplers that were stitched from the same house, then it's possible to discern a particular style that existed within that house. And well, I just thought this was a fantastically interesting and really convincing argument. So I very much enjoyed that aspect of the book. The other aspect of the book that I particularly enjoyed was the discussion of possible sources which the girls were using in order to produce their samplers. And the book identifies 2 possible pattern books that were used by the orphans to produce their samplers. And the book includes pages, reproductions of pages from these other pattern books. So one of the books is a pattern album produced for Prince Albert's exhibition at Crystal Palace in 1851. And I noticed that the permissions for these images came from Cross Stitch Antiques. So I went on the Cross Stitch Antiques website, and you can actually buy the chart of the pattern album from Prince Albert's exhibition at Crystal Palace from Cross Stitch Antiques. So I'm going to try to link the details for that below in case you're interested. Another important source of information for the book is clearly Claudia Dutcher Kissler's Bristol Sampler's website. And again, I can link that down below, because if you are interested, then that is another fantastic source of information and of images as well. My favourite image in the book, in addition to being familiar with Mary 395, I think a lot of people in the sampler community are probably familiar with the sampler Harriet Salt, which is again another sort of classic looking red sampler. So as I was going through the book, I was absolutely amazed and delighted to see that Harriet had actually stitched another sampler, but this sampler was not stitched in just red, but was stitched in different colours. And so the image I'm going to share with you today is the image of Harriet Salt's polychromatic sampler. And it's thought that Harriet stitched this sampler, this sampler with a range of different colours and these fantastic floral motifs. It's thought that she stitched those after she had stitched her red sampler. And I just thought, what a fantastic piece of information to have found, that Harriet Salt, one of these really well-known names in Bristol Samplers, has another sampler, but one that looks different, and that so we can sort of see the progression in her needlework and the skills that she had and how they developed. So that was my favourite image in this book. The book is absolutely full of images. The number of Bristol samplers that you can see is really extraordinary, and it was an absolute delight to be able to see the samplers and to follow this core argument that there were variations in the samplers that could be connected to the different houses at the orphanage. This brings me to the final question in my review, which is, does this book get a place on my stitching bookshelf? I must admit, I really did hesitate in getting this book. It cost £75. I was able to get my copy sent from Witney Antiques. It came extremely quickly, very well packaged. I have absolutely no complaints on that front, but £75 is a lot of money, and I was hesitant because I wasn't certain that there would be enough in here about samplers. It was very hard to find information about the book before I purchased it, so I felt there was sort of an element of risk, and I'm hoping that by watching this video you will have some better sense of if you would like to spend the money. But I think because I don't have a huge number of books on my stitching bookcase about Bristol Samplers, in fact I'm not sure I have any others, I think if you only have one, this one seems pretty spectacular to me. The number of samplers that are shown here and that central argument I do think is special. I don't know if it's been made elsewhere. If you know of other sources that are putting forward a similar argument, or even a completely contradictory argument, I would love to hear about them if you'd put the details down in the comments below. But I do think that this is very comprehensive. It gives you a fantastic understanding of the orphanage. It's very, very well balanced in its thinking about George Muller and his recognising his contribution, but also recognising that he was a man who was driven by his religious beliefs, and also recognising that whilst the orphans probably were very fortunate in many respects to have somewhere to go that wasn't the workhouse, that life there was still very difficult. So I think it is a great book. I'm absolutely thrilled to have it, but it is, I guess, worth knowing that it's not purely about samplers, but there is a really substantial sampler section, and it's very well written. There are tons and tons of illustrations. It's a really beautiful book, so I think it will look just perfect on my stitching bookshelf. If you've got a copy of the book, I would love to know what you think about it. If you have other Bristol Sampler books that you've read and enjoyed, again, I would love to hear about it. Next time, I'm thinking of reviewing a book about buying samplers at auction. But if you have any other recommendations for books that you'd like to see reviewed or discussed on the channel, then please do put your suggestions in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you'd like to subscribe, that would be fantastic. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.